Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us this morning. I also want to thank Mr. Robson Lee for his quite wide-ranging set of observations and perspectives. We're going to leave as much time as we can to answer some of the questions that delegates have posted on the Q&A. If you have other questions, comments, please do so on the Q&A function as well. In the meantime, maybe I can just invite our panelists for their first responses to Robson's comments. Maybe Teresa and then Tony.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Lim, and it's a pleasure to be addressing all 498 of you. And I do recognize your context. Yeah, many of you come from different profiles of charities. You may be at the different life cycle of your charity. Some of you may be in your startup stage, some of you in your growth stage, and some of you might already be making huge impact to the community. And some of you might be at a stage where you're plateauing, meaning the mission that you set out to achieve, you have already achieved it. And you're wondering what next, right? Meaning you are looking at renewing your charity mission. From my perspective and responding to Robson's presentation, I'm also the nominating and remuneration committee chapter of chair of the Singapore Institute of Directors. Yeah, and with SID, we define an effective board to be one that balances the compliance and the performance of the charity. And keeping that balance is the challenge, yeah. But you need to balance conformance and performance. So Robson covered a lot on the conformance. From my angle, I would like to talk a bit about performance of the charity, meaning, and from the board perspective, it is important to note that board dynamics are important. You know, what sort of culture does the board build in the boardroom that is cascaded down to the whole organization? I also noticed that in the last decade, the concepts of leadership does not just apply to management and the workforce, it's also creeping into the boardroom. This means that the onus is on the board to create clear directions, create the strategy, and ensure that clear goals are cascaded down to the C-level, C-1, -2, all the way down to the operational leaders. So that's the board leadership part. Another topic that's very, very important would be how the board gets along with the management. We call it the board CEO relationship, the chair CEO relationship, and the board management relationship. So these are all big topics by itself. And finally, another important topic would be board engagement. How do we ensure that boards are fully engaged? You can never get all the board members to be engaged to the same quantum, but an astute CEO would be able to do a stakeholder analysis, yeah, and manage each board member differently so that they get the maximum contribution from each board member. And I noticed some of the questions are also asking about CLG societies. I do notice that some of you may be CLG, some of you may be societies, maybe even trust. I don't know whether there are any cooperatives in this audience. And some of you may be NPO without a charity status, meaning you could be a social enterprise. Yeah, this means you are regulated by different instruments. Yeah, ranging from the Companies Act to Societies Act, Trustee Acts, which lies with the Ministry of Law and MES, Cooperative Acts, which is under the Singapore Cooperative Federation. And if you are a social enterprise, then you are liable to the Companies Act and also ACRA, right? So, you know, what I'm saying is that one answer doesn't fit all. Yeah, you will have to put it into your context. I think that's a very long response to your answer, Prof. Lim. I shall stop now and pass it to Tony.
Thank you, Teresa. Tony, any comments from you?
Yeah, thanks, Prof. Lim. For me, maybe I can just share some quick thoughts. In particular, I wanted to be able to maybe share with the audience some of the work that MPPC has done in terms of the enhancing the effectiveness of non-profit boards. So if I may just share my screen now. It's really, I hope you can see the screen, and just trying to get it to a full screen mode. Okay. Okay. So if I may just go into some of the resources actually that participants can have access to. And the first one I wanted to highlight is really the handbook on effective nonprofit boards. You have the QR code there. This particular handbook is based on a 2-year study that we did in 2019 and 2020. And it actually provides quite a good cross-section of the different types of charities that are operating today across different sectors, the 8 sectors, the legal status of whether IPC or charities, as well as the financial side. So the smaller ones, as Teresa says, maybe in an earlier stage of development and maturity, and then those who are scaling up and those who are making real impact. And out of this study, actually, we derived a framework of 8 components across 3 broad themes. And I think both Robson and Teresa mentioned them. First one is actually dynamics and culture, really how the board operates in relation to management as well. And then strategy and role, and then structures and processes as well. And I think within the study also, you will see that there are some. This is just a quick summary of some of these elements of the 8 factors. And really, I think it covers many of the points that were raised by both Robson and Teresa, which is that actually there is a lot to discuss about dynamics and culture, and especially the relationship between the board and management. That's so important. And if we can drill down further, is the chairman and the CEO. That's very, very critical to proper functioning and optimizing the performance of the whole organization. Then, of course, there's this element of strategy and role. And Teresa talked about leadership, and leadership oftentimes is a very important dimension that leaders need to look at. Strategy is to look ahead to help the charity continue to be relevant, to be effective, and adapt to changing conditions, which, as we all know, in the last few years is extremely important, that there is that good sensing of what the environment is showing us and how the charity can adapt and continue to be relevant. And then finally, structures and processes. I think in many situations, there is a danger where the processes happen if it happens to be someone who is doing it, and then when the person is no longer with the organization, it stops. So it's important to institutionalize proper structures and processes, and the aspect of governance and compliance, which, as Teresa says, is just one part of it. The other part is actually performance. And really, to me, actually the composition and diversity, the ability to bring very diverse talents that perhaps help the charity to sense the environment better, cover all the key areas that charity has to work on, and to be able to really draw in broader perspectives that ultimately will help the management team do a better job of executing on the strategy. And of course, this point about renewal, I think renewal is very important. Renewal also gives us a chance to refresh the board and address certain deficiencies and gaps in the board composition, so that again, the board can function at its optimal. And it's not just at the charity level. You can see also even at the national level, leadership succession is of paramount importance. And for us, we would advocate the instituting board renewal and succession planning carefully, doing it deliberately, so that we can identify the right talents and give them enough time for them to learn about the charity, and for the charity to be able to adapt to the working style of different board members and possibly future chairmen, so that there is a very carefully planned leadership transition. The other few things I wanted to highlight is the board appointment guide for charities. I would say a wonderful guide. Teresa was on the project team, so you can ask her questions about what's in the guide. But extremely useful. And you know, one particular area is about diversity, which is one part of the theme that we're trying to cover on this panel. Very important that we understand how this thing works. It's very practical, has a lot of very useful tips in terms of board appointments. The other few things I'd like to share is that, you know, the Center for Nonprofit Leadership, which is part of MVPC, has a board pulse diagnostic tool. And we talk about self-assessment. You know, it's almost like the idea that how do we as a board know how well we're doing? We may all think we're doing a fantastic job, but actually in reality, we might be quite dysfunctional. And so it is useful to make sure we do a proper diagnostic from time to time. And this tool, which is from MVPC, which is free, you can actually undertake this process so that you allow the boards to think about where, take stock and really implement concrete actions to be able to enhance overall board effectiveness. And I think it's a very good investment of the time. Typically, the process lasts about 3 months, and apart from the chair, the other board members maybe have 1 or 2 touch points. So it's not very onerous, and I would strongly encourage, you know, if there are board members out there to strongly consider using this diagnostic tool. The other thing I wanted to share is board match. Now, if you, in the diagnostic tool and your own assessment, you realize that there are certain types of board members that you like to bring on board, maybe digital capabilities, governance, or marketing, fundraising, so forth. And you want to look for new board members and not go back to the friends of the chairman, friends of the board member kind of route. You can tap on Board Match, which is a service that, again, CNPL provides. That so if you're a nonprofit, you can sign up and tell us, you know, where are the opportunities, the board positions that are available. If you're a volunteer, you have specific expertise, senior executive in various corporations, and you like to be contributing as a board member on a nonprofit board, then you can sign up as a board match volunteer. And we do the matching, and we allow the organization and the individual to meet. And it's kind of a mutual selection process. You know, the person has to be comfortable with the NPO has to be comfortable with the volunteer as well, and they can decide whether they want to appoint this person onto the board or onto the board committees, so that they can begin to learn about the nonprofit area of work. And finally, just this suggestion of continuous learning. Actually, there are many things that we can learn in the governance and developing effective nonprofit boards. And so the Center for Nonprofit Leadership runs a series of Board Connect forums. And you see here, you know, the upcoming one on the 22nd of September. The theme is Future of Charity Boards. And you have very eminent, very you know, experienced speakers who will share their perspectives. And so we just give ourselves a chance to continue to keep learning about the best practices, different perspectives on how to set up effective nonprofit boards. So I'll just stop here. Thanks for the opportunity to be part of this panel. Happy to take questions and, you know, go on with the discussion. Thank you very much. Back to you, Prof. Lim.
Thanks very much, Tony. So ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned earlier on, you can type in your questions on the Q&A function. If there are questions that you would like to see addressed, maybe vote on them, and then we will address them according to the upvotes that we receive. Perhaps we can just take a look at the first set of questions.
I'm happy to take the first question. Yeah, because, well, let's just do it because there are so many questions. So the first question is, can a charity CEO also be a board member? Is there any conflict of interest? Well, in the listed companies, most of the CEOs are a member of the board. In the charities, CEOs are what we call ex-official member of the board. So they are involved in all of the board engagement and meetings, but they are not allowed to vote, because there is a sense that there may be a conflict of interest because you're voting for your own execution plan and the quality of work that you produce. So in the charity boards, I've not come across a CEO that is a full member of a board, but I do encourage CEOs to be ex officio, and even the COO or the CFO. Anybody in the C-suite should be encouraged to be sitting as an ex officio member of the board. That's my perspective.
If I might just add on, I think for us, especially charities, we take reference from the Code of Governance. And there is this particular area where it talks about board members should exercise independent judgment and act in the best interest of the charity. And to do so, I think it is desirable for the board to be totally independent from the staff working at the charity. So unless it's expressly permitted by the governing instruments, like say the Constitution, generally it is not encouraged. So it's only allowed if it's expressly permitted in the governing instrument. And if they are allowed, they should not be, let's say the staff, not just paid staff, not that more than 1/3 of the board and not chair the board. So it's actually about that check and balance, a separation of responsibility, such that there is no conflict of interest. So I agree with Teresa. I have not seen actually CEOs of charities that also are board members. They are ex officio, they participate in all the activities, but they do not vote, so that there's a clear separation of responsibility and check and balance.
If I can just jump in on this, I think it's important, and I think I spoke about it earlier, and that the board members should be real independent figures who are not mere nominees of the senior executive or the executive director. And basically, you have a situation where technically, the board makes a decision, but in reality, it's just echoing or chorusing what the executive director wants him or her to, endorse or to second. So I think it's important that the members of the board or charity governing council should be truly independent and be able to make decisions without fear of favor. It's not easy to achieve this because I think particularly in the Asian context, and even for many listed companies in this part of the world, the CEO is also the controlling shareholder, and he decides as to who sits on the board. And some people feel that, well, perhaps I shouldn't speak up, or I'll just simply quietly agree or assent to it. So how do you achieve that proverbial balance whereby you have key management personnel who sits on the board to assist the board in making the right decision, but is not there to intimidate or to ensure that the board, basically rubber stamps what he or her wants them to do. So that's my take.
Thank you all. I just beg everyone's patience. I lost connection for a while early on in this session. But maybe we'll just continue to look at the questions that are on the Q&A function. The first two on my list here are related. It's still to do with the nominating committee, how it is made up, how it can be delineated from the main board, its function, expertise, and so on. So maybe panelists would like to comment on this.
Well, I can start with some of the principles that should guide the nominating committee. You must have board members with the right skills to either chair or be part of the nominating committee, and not just have warm bodies who have no idea about how to build human capital and organizational capital for the particular charity. So nominating committees must come with leadership skill, good knowledge of organizational and leadership skills, HR, and everything that revolves around these main topics. In the Companies Act and even in the Code of Governance, we are not expecting more than 3 members in a nominating committee. Yeah, and we are also suggesting that the chair might not serve as the chair of the nominating committee, because that doesn't look good in terms of independence. Yeah, so the guiding principle is that the nominating committee must be independent. Yeah, so a chair can be one of the members, but preferably not to chair the committee. The nominating committee can also craft the terms of reference to suggest that all of the members must be from the existing board, or some of the members can be from external, from outside the organization. So it really depends on the terms of reference. Yeah, and the terms of reference has to be approved by the entire board. That delegates the nominating role to the NC. It is a common phenomenon that the NC is now combined with the remuneration committee, and it's now known as the NRC. So both roles can be combined into one committee. I've also recently looked at a research report from Russell Reynolds, whereby many NCs, nominating committees, are looking at renaming the NC, because a lot of what NC does touches on the governance of the board as well. So they are also thinking maybe the NC should be renamed as the GNC, Governance and Nominating Committee. I also looked at a recent research report from Willis Towers Watson regarding the remuneration committee. And the same trend seems to be happening. The RCs are thinking of renaming themselves to be not just looking at remuneration matters, but also talent management. Talent management at the C level and at the workforce level as well. So what we are experiencing now, with all the external environment changing, with a lot of challenges and demands from ESG, for example, and black swan events like the pandemic, boards are now being more vigilant and expecting more from these two committees. And that's why it's resulting in a trend of rethinking the terms of reference for both the NCs and the RCs.
If I may add, I think I have not seen a situation where all the NC members are all non-board members. It is useful, I think, for independence and more objective perspective to have non-board members who are familiar with the charity to be on the nominating committee. So a balance between some board members and some non-board members. In some situations, I've seen board members who have stepped down to continue to serve on the nominating committee because they can then provide that connection between what they know about the organization and also still tap on their networks as to who might be suitable. But in all these cases, it's best not to have the chair of the nominating committee to be chair of the board as well. I agree with that. Because there's too much power concentrated. So there's work to be done, I think, in this area. I would say important that the nominating committee members and the different types of variants of that, as Teresa pointed out, there should be some who have good understanding of where the charity is going, and also some, in a way, some skin in the game, that if their board members who take a view to bring certain people on board, they have the responsibility to make sure that that appointment also works. They have a responsibility to make it work, rather than someone who's not related to the board bring in members and have no responsibility for the outcome of that new board appointments. Just my perspective.
My view is it's of course the most desirable situation that you have members of the NC or governance nominating committee or what have you be comprised of persons who are independent, who are not existing board members. In fact, CRs for many years, the NC comprises of people who are not on the board, and once they have served their functions, the NC is dissolved, and until the next term, where members need to be re-elected, and that's where the NC is convened, and they are invariably different people. So we do have such a structure in CRs. In the Law Society, I'm chairman of the audit committee. My committee members are non-members of the main committee. Some of them were past presidents or past members of the committee. The AC basically is to look after the finances and make sure all the roles and functions of the AC is carried out. So there is some mileage or some benefit in having a group of people who will decide on issues like whether the person continues to remain on the board, or he's just there because he's an old friend of the executive director or some old school network people. So you must inject a certain degree of independence and objectivity. There's a lot of work to be done, because I think the essential thing is, even for big charities, unless there's there are a group of people who are very motivated to support a particular charity, normally the reality is such that it's very difficult to find people, volunteers to serve or to attend meetings regularly and to contribute effectively. Some take it more like a badge of honor to say that I sit on whatever committees, but in essence they don't probably turn up once or twice a year for meetings. So yet at the same time, you can't be too prescriptive about this, because at the end of the day, charities, unlike listed companies and profit organizations, they are fundamentally supported by volunteers and donors. So there's a big reality check. Of course, there is a gold standard to aspire. I think we need to work harder to ensure that we reach a certain level whereby charities are run and they are shining examples, which I think the government, MCCY, Charity Council has done a lot of good work in it, in promoting awards for transparency, for governance, and winning, acknowledging their contributions and letting them be publicized and acknowledged by all and sundry that these are the well-governed, well-managed charities. So a lot of education, a lot of support. I'll call it moral suasion, a gentle kind of way to encourage, because otherwise people will just say, why so much trouble? I get into all these issues, and I've got better things to do. So you need to strike that balance. But it's always good to have a good set of standards, but it should not be just mere letters that are written in a beautiful crafted constitution, but in reality, nothing is achieved.
Thanks very much. Yeah, thanks. Okay, the next set of questions, I suppose, has to do with diversity. We've spoken a little bit about that, but maybe panelists would like to address this some. Also, first question here would be really, how do we find the matches with the guiding principle of diversity, and how diverse, what kinds of expertise we need to have. A related one is age diversity, right? And further down, there's a question from Eunice, which also has to do with the fact that diverse boards have SDG implications as well. So maybe we can address some of these questions.
Okay, I can take this question first. First, I know the topic of diversity has polarized many people, right? Because something is gender, something is a broader spectrum. At the Charity Council, we do embrace the broader spectrum, which gender is one of them. Yeah, so from my perspective, there are 3 levels of diversity. We have the demographical ones, yeah, the age, the gender, whether you are graduate or not, these are all demographical, which I believe are very conventional types of diversity. We should be past that already. Yeah. And the second one would be your skills, your lived experience, whether you've been part of the in the volunteer before, whether you have been on the board of another charity before. I think that's also a second version of diversity. And there's a third level, which is about the way you think about things. Yeah, I think that diversity is not yet fully explored, because sometimes when we nominate or appoint a board member, we don't spend enough time to familiarize with the principles that guide this person, the values that this person has. And I think the belief system of the potential board member as well. I think this all drives a certain worldview, yeah, influences how this person think about things. And it's important, and I think that's where the real diversity lies. You know, if you have a fully diverse board that have the demographics, different skills and experiences, and also different worldviews, and in a culture which allows for open dialogue and discussions where board members challenge each other and then collectively agree on a final decision, I think that would be ideal. Yeah, in the listed space, diversity policy is now mandatory, yeah, as of this year, meaning all the listed companies will have to submit their diversity policy by December 2022. But in the charity sector, we are only strongly encouraging a diversity policy. If you look at the board appointment guide, which was put together by a few parties, including SID, NVPC, the Council for Board Diversity, it suggests that all charities must put in place a diversity policy to guide board members in their nominating process. Even though it's not mandated, it is strongly advised. So when I was the chair of SATA, I did actually have a soft mandate for my charity that we would have at least a 30% female representation, because I do believe that females have a different way of thinking about things from the male, right? So it wasn't the gender I was after, it was the how we think about things. Yeah, and of course the two can come together as well. Yeah. So I saw Eunice chat that there has been enough research to suggest that diversity does bring about more value to the mission and the strategy of the organization. And I agree to that as well. Yeah. So in the charity sector, we're doing very well, right? From the NVPC survey, we have about 35% of female representation on charity boards, as compared to the listed companies, which has about, what, Robson, correct me if I'm wrong, about 20%. Yeah, and still struggling. Yeah, so there's a lot more to do. And in the charity sector, I'm just a little bit concerned because the 35% has not grown since 2 years ago. Yeah, and if you really talk about parity, gender parity, we should be looking at a 50-50% split. So we're still quite far away from gender parity.
If I may just add, and really looking at it from this perspective of board effectiveness, actually, sometimes, okay, we do look at percentages and numbers. And of course, it's easy, right, to pick up annual report and see, okay, you know, how many female, how many of this race, or, you know, are they age diverse and so forth. So it's those, as Teresa says, like the demographic, probably the more superficial dimensions of diversity. But I would like to say that actually, if we think about what makes a charity successful and what makes a board effective, I think diversity is a very key component. If we are, you know, a bunch of folks who basically think alike, there's really no value that different board members can bring. You might as well have one person just run the meeting and make the decisions, because they all think alike, right? The value of diversity is the different kinds of thinking, as Teresa mentioned. And when there are robust conversations, if there are, you know, the kind of debates that go on that can help stretch management to think about issues in a different way, I think that the charity will benefit from it. So I really want to maybe encourage us to think about, you know, if we really want our boards to be effective, actually the way there is, one big part of it is really diversity, and not to see it as just complying to check the box, but to see as, you know, actually this is going to help us do our work even better. And let's make it something that is very intentional and deliberate and systematic.
Prof. Lim, my view is diversity should be approached in a certain perspective, that the nominating committee should not be ring-fenced or curtailed by age. For example, ageism is not a thing that we should have. Neither should capable, competent women be excluded. So I think the first approach to practice diversity in spirit and in substance is to make sure that there are no intrinsic prejudices or exclusions, so to speak, or because I need to have certain, members of the board based on, it must be predominantly males, for example, then that's wrong. Or, it can't be above 70 years of age. In fact, the Companies Act has been amended to remove that restriction that you need special resolution to appoint people above 70, So if you have all these restrictive prejudices or restrictions deleted, and you look purely at merit, ability to contribute, experience, and of course, subtly, you might want to say, look, historically, we have not had that many women volunteers to serve on the board. Let's have X numbers, slowly built in. But it's not there as a hardwire kind of quota, so to speak. But I think the important thing is to make sure that there are no restrictions, there are no prejudices based on age, discrimination based on gender or religious affinity, etc. I think then we are starting the proper step towards achieving diversity because it's driven by merit, driven by future and current needs, as well as succession planning. I think these are all principles to observe. Remove all prejudices and restrictions, even if it's historically there for whatever reason. And then I think we can truly approach diversity in a substantive and meaningful way.
Thank you all. On a related note, maybe I just wanted to throw in my own 2 cents here. I think as with the university, in charity boards, especially where the role is advisory, I think board membership, the older you are, the better you might be. That's my suggestion to all of us, right? So that's one. But I think the related question I want to ask here is, it was alluded to earlier on that this is all voluntary, and therefore sometimes there's difficulty attracting volunteers to serve on boards. Given that parameter, how choosy should charities be about board membership? We take them as they come, or do we really want to apply certain principles as Robson has suggested?
Well, I think, can I answer that question? Sure. I think much as sometimes when the charity is small and you are hard-pressed to find good people to help, I think it's important to look at the person, interview that candidate, and understand what inspires or motivates him to volunteer himself. Because the last thing you want is that that person is collecting badges of badges of honor to say I'm now so and so and board member of whatever organization is reputable. And of course, the small charities, you will not attract this kind of people. But for the bigger charities which are reputable and very well established, then you want to be careful about the motives of the person, whether he's going to use that for some other collateral purpose. So is he really going to be committed, or he's just going to be there and then you see him once or twice a year and that's about it? And he goes there and after 10-15 minutes, he excuses himself and disappears to answer a phone call and never come back. So I think it's important to look at the person. Of course, more charities will tell you, hey, look, beggars can't be choosers. And sometimes it's true because you literally have to beg people to come and serve. But at the same time, also, you don't want a situation whereby people with collateral purposes and objectives come because they want to use that for some other purpose, that association for some other purpose. So it's not an easy question. And I do second your view that experience counts a lot. Sometimes the guy with the white hair has a lot of value to bring, but I think more importantly for succession planning, in Chinese you call 老中青. You need to have the experienced people to guide, to mentor, to share experiences, the middle-aged people to basically oversee more of the day-to-day operations and functions. The younger one to aspire because you need new blood too, so that there's continuity of the charity. That's my view.
Thank you very much. Teresa?
Okay, your question is how choosy should we be, right?
Yes.
My answer is very choosy and and very intentional. Yeah, because firstly, we are talking about the use of public money, yeah, to further a cause that will create a better society. So these are all very serious matters. I do believe that the starting point would be whether the board is clear about the mission and the strategy. Yeah, when the strategy is very clear, then the board would be able to define the types of profile that forms the board. Yeah, and I do not just look at experience alone, I also look at personality. Yeah, so there should be a soft skills matrix that guides the board in its selection and sourcing. There should be a competency matrix as well. Granted, the functional skills are important. The finance, the HR, the legal, those are important, but more importantly, the ability to think strategically. Yeah, so if you were to hire a finance person to be on the board, do I hire a bean counter versus somebody who is financially savvy, but also very future focused? That the second category is what we would be looking for. Same for HR, you don't want an operational HR, but rather somebody who's very strategic in building organizational and human capital. So personality would be one thing, competency another. The third thing that I will look for is motivation. Yeah, I mentioned earlier, what are the value systems that drive this person to really want to serve the cause? Yeah, and the last one that I look for is capacity. Does this person even have the time and energy to serve? Yeah, so these are my 4 checklists of selecting a person. And then I will go to NVPC board match and say, these are all my criteria. I'll create a job spec, a board match. Yeah, what are the accountability, transparency, and responsibility of this board member? Then I will go to NVPC board match and say, hey, please find me some candidates. Yeah, and float them through the NC. Yeah, if you have an NC. I do realize that many of the large charities have an NC, but the small ones and the medium ones, maybe not. So in that case, what happens? Well, in that case, just appoint a task force, right? If you cannot have an NC for whatever reason, appoint a task force to look into the sourcing, make sure your methods of sourcing are independent. Yeah, and just do a cross-reference against your list of criteria. Yeah, and when you have that selection, the short list, put it up for nominations, put it up to the board for nominations. It goes to the AGM, right? And somebody talk about, aren't the charity members, don't they have the final say in the election? Yes, of course. Yeah, board can nominate. Then it goes to the elections. After their elections, they are appointed officially to be board member. So it's a very structured and deliberate process. Yeah, and again, you could do it because the law calls for it, but you could do it because you want to honor the spirit of the law. Yeah, if you have a good set of board members, then you would have high quality decisions. And then you can be assured that the donors will come to you because you have a credible board. Yeah, the donors will come to you. Not only that, the volunteers will also want to serve you. Yeah. So my advice would be spend more time on the nomination and appointments. Then you will have less headache in the board management part of the job.
Yeah.
Thanks. Tony?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Teresa, for the plug for board match. Really something that we'll be happy, to help the sector find new board members. But I do agree that we should be very choosy because you think about a group dynamics. If you have 3 board members, 5 board members, 10 board members, any new board member that comes in changes the dynamics of the group. So the competency is important, the diversity aspects. But to be able to feel like they are aligned in terms of values and motivations is critical, because you also don't want disruptive influences. You also don't want people who really don't align and sign up for the board for different reasons. I think there are some organizations that like to put luminaries, very famous people, high profile. But like Teresa says, if they have no time, they can't contribute, they're just, is 0 out of 4 every year, then what's the point? So I really want to encourage us to be very careful about it. Sometimes the most famous and the most high profile person may not be the best board member for your charity, but someone maybe senior enough with the right exposure, the right kind of posture, the way they think, they're really willing to contribute, spend time understanding the issues and keep taking that strategic view and bringing value to the board. I think that's really important. So not just the compliance of diversity or all that, but really think about a board as a team, a board as being able to function very effectively as a single united unit that actually can really help work with the management team for the long-term future of the charity. So think about that carefully, because when, as in many management teams, even we take a lot of care, selecting senior management members. So why shouldn't we take the same level of care in picking board members?
Thank you. Okay, coming back to the questions on the Q&A board, the one we have on top here has to do with government bodies, government appointments to boards and how there might be potential conflicts there. Comments from the panel? Okay, maybe for some context, I sit on one board of a charity that has nominations from the police and the prison services, but that's got to do with the kind of services that were done by that particular organization. So I just wonder how this sits across the wider range of charities out there.
I can see, unless you're a state board, then PSD, Public Service Division, will have a big say in the appointment of the board members and even the charities. And if you're a large charity that is accepting a lot of grants from the government, and I do know of many large charities that receive up to 75% of their funding from government, then I would say that you can't stop the government from having a say as to who sits on your board or who leads the charity. Yeah, right. But in most cases, the board would be the final decision maker, together with the members of the charity, as to who sits on the board.
I think my take is that if the government nominates 1 or 2 persons to sit on the board, it's more like because they have certain interests in the way the organization is run, whether is it because it's funded by the government or there had been some previous problems and they just want to make sure that everything is all right. But I don't think they will take a proactive role. They are just there to share and to weigh in on some other issues of consideration which the board should consider, but primarily they are not there as the drivers of the organization. I think over time, unless it's funded by the government, it would not be a permanent situation. I've seen organizations where the ministry nominates people or the particular government department nominates, and that was because there were some problems. But I think over time, they may say that, well, I think the issues have been resolved. We will no longer nominate people into the committee. So I think it's not really an issue. I don't think there's a conflict of interest. I don't think it's the government's interest to be involved in the decisions of the organization, because primarily they are not stakeholders. They are just there to make sure that things are observed because of funding, because of financing, or because of their other important things that they need to make sure are properly ironed out and resolved before they in a sense, relinquish their right to nominate or their desire to nominate.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Okay, the next one here has to do with CLG, ROS type things, which I think that Teresa and has addressed early on this session. Is there anything you want to add about this, including cooperatives and all this other?
Well, I would say download the Societies Act and download the Companies Act if you're a CLG. Read them through. As a board member, it is your fiduciary duty to be familiar with your the regulatory instruments that guide you. But there is a question, how do I know whether I should be converting from a society to a CLG? Most of you would know that if you're a board council member on your society, you do have personal liabilities. Yeah, whereas if you are a board member on a CLG, your liability is limited, yeah, to the act itself. Yeah, so there is a risk. Yeah, for example, if there's a fraud or a public complaint and you need to be investigated, and in the worst case, where punishment has to be meted up, you are personally liable. So why do most charities then select the ROS method? I would say that the ROS is a bit more loose in its corporate governance compared to the Companies Act. Yeah, and some charities find it easier to navigate around the Societies Act. Yeah, but many times they do not know that there's personal liabilities. So when I bring it up to them, all of them start saying, maybe we should move towards the CLG. Yeah, so don't do it because of that. You will again have to fall back on the mission and the strategy, the risk level of your charity before you decide. Yeah, because when you move to a CLG, there are more compliance demands. Yeah, and on top of that, you still have the charity governance to adhere to, and the IPC as well. Yeah, so that there can be quite a lot on the compliance side.
Okay, can I just jump in as a lawyer? I need to correct the perception that if you are CLG, you are not personally responsible as a director. On the contrary, the Companies Act is very prescriptive on the director's duties and responsibilities. So whether members of the society has personal liability, it depends on how the court would judge the structure of the charity, whether the members of the governing board of that society, are they seen as trustees? Because if they are trustees, they have the same fiduciary duties, in which case is governed by a different set of legislation, the Trustees Act, common law on fiduciary, which is quite identical to that of directors, because invariably, if something goes wrong, the court will not hesitate to lift the corporate veil and go after the directors, even if you are CLG. I think previously there's this NKF, which the directors were responsible directly. I believe it was a CLG. So in any case, a word of suggestion to people who have been invited or who aspire to be members of the governing board or council, ask yourself whether you have the time, the commitment to serve. Because if you are just there and you bury your head in the sand 3/4 of the time, and if something happens, you can't say that I didn't know, I wasn't involved, because if the regulator or enforcement agency decides that you are tardy, you are negligent, you are basically sleeping on the job, then you can't wriggle out of it. And that was, in fact, the sad case for a number of the directors of NKF previously, because they were comfortable that the CEO was doing his job, and so basically they didn't pay much attention to it. But when something happens of that scale, they were severely shocked. And I know that the chairman of the organization, he had to be extradited and made a bankrupt. And his house was sold, and it was a very sad case because he was serving as a volunteer, although for many years, and a good friend of the CEO. But you see, so the point is, whether it's constituted as a CLG or society, I think it's important that members of the governing council You should treat this appointment with care, exercise due diligence. Don't hesitate to call out if you think that there is any mismanagement or any wrongdoing. And really, if push comes to the shove, resign, put your decisions in writing, because at the end of the day, you must be able to discharge the defense of due diligence. And if something happens, you say, look, I've done all this, I raised all this at the board meetings or at the committee meetings. They outvoted me, and I was a minority, so I resigned for these reasons, you know. And then, you know, if something happens, you say, look, this is my defense of due diligence. I've not been tardy. I tried. Of course, I don't want to be disruptive and go and report, because, you know, I don't think that duty requires, unless there's fraud, then you can't say that I abetted by, you know, by keeping quiet and moving off or just shutting my eyes. That it's something that you need to think about. And if in doubt, please see someone who can help you and advise you properly.
Yeah, thanks, Robson, for that reminder. Yeah, because I overlooked mentioning that the liability is not excluded if there's fraud or negligence of your fiduciary duty. So thank you for coming in and giving such a detailed explanation. Yeah.
Okay. Right. I spotted a question earlier on about church board operation, and then there's one somewhere here in the bottom third of my list here has to do with how small religious organizations can function in relation to board operations, fundraising, and so on. So I suppose religious organizations are slightly unique in relation to charitable organizations, and so on. So I just wonder whether the panelists have got more specific or even customized advice for these sorts of organizations.
Maybe I can take that question. I think no. I think whether you are a religious orientated charity and whether set up as CLG or society, I think you have to be careful of your duty as fiduciary. I think it's good to ask yourself, are you able to serve and be committed to serving this particular organization? Because the fact that it might be religious is neither here nor there if something goes wrong and the regulator wants to hold you accountable. Because at the end of the day, if you breach your duty as trustee or as fiduciary, then the law can be very unforgiving because you have been sleeping on your job. It's a secular society that we live in. So things are looked at primarily based on law, the spirit of compliance, and whether have you done your duty, have you exercised your duty of care. So the fact that it might be religious is neither here nor there. I think previously you have seen a situation where it was religious, I believe it was Renci. You know, the CEO had a run-in and he was punished. Members of the board, of course, were not dragged into the thing, but you can see how things can go wrong if at the end of the day it's found that any governing board of a religious organization were tardy or had been negligent. So you have to be careful. The fact that it's religious doesn't exonerate or lighten your duty of care. That's from the legal point of view.
And from my perspective, having worked with church boards, my personal challenge is that the board members who are the religious members are really not interested in all these compliance matters and performance matters, because they have a higher order supreme being to be accounted for. So then I would then recommend that well, at least half or 1/3 of the board are made of non-religious, yeah, and the people who are legally sound with good financial accounting skills and also HR skills, at the very least, to be sitting on the board to guide the religious members of the board. But they are still a charity at the end of the day, and they still have fiduciary duties.
Yeah, and a good example I forgot is the City Harvest, which is not too long ago. I think it was definitely religious. but members of the board were held accountable. And in fact, a number of them went to jail because they were found to have acted wrongly, whether it amounted to criminal negligence or something that's lack of integrity. I think these were issues which were very antagonistic, disquieting. But the bottom line is the government is a secular government, and things are looked at purely from the legal point of view. The fact that it is religious or otherwise doesn't really lighten your duty of care when serious matters have gone wrong and things are not done properly.
If I may just add on, I do serve on church board and faith-based charities. So I just want to make that distinction, right? Because there are slight differences, because in a purely religious organization, a church, that's also a charity, exempt charity, but they may have different way of governance. But I do agree that the principles of due diligence, the legal framework that we operate within does not go away just because you're a church or a temple or a mosque. So I think those things still remain, although the way that it's governed, which is the supreme authority in that denomination, in that church, they may decide how the church boards manage. For example, in the Anglican situation, the local parishes is always chaired by the vicar, right? The parochial church council. So there's no 10-year limit. As long as the person is the vicar, the person is the chair of that council. But in terms of faith-based charities and IPCs, I think that is when, despite being faith-based, I think the code of governance for charities become a lot clearer. That because they are, especially IPCs, if you're talking about public money, then the public trust and confidence does not give you any discount. You still have to comply with the code of governance depending on the size of your charity or organization. So it's very important that board members of these different organizations understand what is involved. Sometimes the churches, because they're all members and so forth, have that implicit trust. But it's important to say trust but verify, right? And trust, but if you are concerned about certain things happening, to call it out. Because ultimately, as Robson has pointed out, sometimes churches also fall down and make serious mistakes. And if we're at a conscience level, you think that this doesn't quite smell right, I think we better take the right stand, so that we can help the church also make sure that it stays on the straight and narrow, and not just think that because you're a church you have free play to decide exactly what you want to do, because I think the law will have its own view on if there's any mismanagement or misuse of funds.
Okay, thank you very much. We have maybe 8 or 9 minutes left to this session. Maybe I'll just address one other category of questions we have here, which has to do with board performance, evaluation, assessments, and so on. So maybe if our panelists can share your thoughts about this, how to do it, how best to do it, and then maybe we can take it from there.
So maybe
yeah, Tony, please.
Go ahead. Yeah,
No, you first.
you before.
Okay, so to me, board performance is it's a very important measure of success of the charity. Yeah, and the only way to nail down what the performance is to have a board evaluation. And the board evaluation, I believe there are tools where you can already, at the end of the year, get each of the board members to respond, and you have a gauge. I would suggest that if you have a board evaluation tool, if you don't have a board evaluation tool, you can mirror it on the Code of Corporate Governance, because ultimately that's what the COC office would be measuring you against as well. Yeah, and it's important to include the CEO in the board evaluation as well. Other than a board collective survey, I actually practice a individual board member self-report as well. So an individual board member will evaluate himself or herself against the same set of questions. Yeah. And I would go one step further to have a peer-to-peer survey. Yeah, so all the other board members will evaluate one board member, which means we are all evaluating each other. Yeah, so you have a board collective evaluation, a peer evaluation, and an individual director evaluation. Yeah, and usually the nominations committee will make sense of the 3 reports and present on the gaps to the board together with the chairman or chairperson. Yeah, and there should be an action plan that that comes about because of the findings. Yeah, because an evaluation is like a feedback tool, right? So you're getting feedback from the board, from the CEO, from each other as well. And based on the feedback, the nominations committee would be able to summarize the strengths of the board as well as the areas of development of the board. Yeah, and the next step would then to be based on the areas of development, what would be the few action plan that the board will embark on for the next 12 months until the next evaluation takes place. Yeah, so once you get this whole process in a routine and disciplined manner, you would be able to do a trend analysis. Yeah, let's say you've done this for 5 years, you will be able to know whether the board has actually progressed and in which areas you have actually excelled and what are the upcoming areas that you still have to work on. Yeah. So I believe you can get the tool from SID. SID has a module that talks about board dynamics, and that's where they give out some of the tools. I'm not sure whether NVPC has created some tools for board evaluation. Yeah, over to you, Tony.
Yeah, so we have the board houses, for the collective board effectiveness, but I think we can share other tools that are out there in the market.
Yeah, the peer and the individual directors.
Yeah, those are others that can be used. I thought just to add 2 points to Teresa's very comprehensive answer. One is that depending on the size of the board and again the maturity, the principle to me is actually always reflect and think about, as a board, how can we do better? So smaller boards, maybe 3-4 people may have slightly different way of doing it, but do it anyway, and be systematic and just follow through, which is I think Teresa's point as well. Let's always have this sense that if as a board we want to help the organization succeed and do better, we as a board also must perform effectively and get better over time. But the second one is actually about that spirit of openness and being willing to talk through things and be willing to discuss sometimes difficult matters, but maybe behind closed doors or in small groups. Because I think if there is just about, a series of checklists or just, going through the motion, ultimately we can have many tools, but they don't work if it's people don't buy in and feel like there is something valuable that will come out of this process. So I really feel like that sense of openness, again, alignment, the selection process, right? You pick people who really have that growth mindset, who are willing to say, okay, maybe I can improve in this area and that area. And then, we work together towards a better dynamic in future. I think those are very important because ultimately these are groups of humans. So the human dynamics are at play. And, sometimes it's, being able to know that, certain things that were said were not said with ill intent. And to be able to have a forum to be able to address it so that people can move forward together. So that spirit of openness, that spirit to be willing to talk through difficult things is so critical. And I think very much part of that notion that as a board, let's always want act together and always want to build stronger bonds, be united, and always want to move forward together.
And just to add to the integrity of the process, I've had the unpleasant experience of having to ask a board member to step down, after the board evaluation suggests that there was not only no contribution, but also abuse of some of the board power. Yeah, so to give it gravitas and also to make sure that the process holds integrity. Some of these unpleasant things do have to happen.
I think in essence, it functions like any entity, that whether you are charity or profit orientated, that it must be run properly, there must be integrity, the processes must be institutionalized. You have good people, and then of course there are always budgetary constraints. You have problem attracting good people because you depend on their spirit of volunteering. And all that, but all said and done, I think you can't be substandard in your choice of people. And that while I would rather have 3 good people sitting on the board and then have 15, 20 people who basically don't contribute, or worse still, they have some other collateral purposes. And I agree with Teresa, anyone that falls short of good standards of behavior, conduct, or integrity must go. And I've done it before previously in a not so pleasant way, but this person has to go because that person was abusing or basically bullying staff, or basically worse still, putting his hands in the till. There were all these style instances that at the end of the day do the right thing, not just do things right and comply with the code, because if you can, as rules can be circumvented, the human being is a very complex organization. But at the end of the day, if the system is properly institutionalized, that there's a group of people who are willing to stand up for what is the right thing to do, then such tardy and irresponsible behavior cannot stand. I think that's the way things should be run.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. I thank all our participants and delegates for your meaningful comments and questions. I thank our panelists for their wisdom. It's certainly been wide-ranging and comprehensive and educational. So I thank you all. Have a pleasant morning.